Thank you very much. Right, well, we'll get started then. I'll put the chat up so I can see that as well. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second webinar in our speed management series, which is delivered in partnership with Redspeed International. My name's Simon Turner. I'm the engagement manager for the National Highways Driving for Better Business programme, and I'm also chairman of the trustees at the Association for Road Risk Management, which manages the Project Edward campaign at the moment. So delighted to have you with us. We're going to be discussing new technology being used for speed management. And joining me for today's discussion is Tom Duckham, Chief Executive of Redspeed International. We have Richard Rowe, who's Professor of Psychology at the University of Sheffield. And we've got Daniel Ward, who's Telematics Director at Acorn Insurance. So thank you for joining me today. Welcome to the panel. Spot of housekeeping before we start. The session is being recorded, so you'll be able to share that with any colleagues who weren't able to be here today. Everyone should be on mute during the presentation. If you've got any questions, you'll be able to put them in the chat. We're going to start by going through some of the key technology developments in speed management. But as I say, if you've got any questions, put them in the chat and James and I will route through those as we're going through the presentations, and we'll try and discuss as many of those as we can over the next hour. So let's start then. So perhaps to start, I could ask each of our panelists to briefly introduce themselves and explain a little bit about their own interest and expertise in speed management. Tom, maybe you first.
Okay, thank you very much. And hello, everyone. As you've just heard, I am the CEO at Redspeed International. Firstly, I just want to say thank you to the Project Edward team for giving us the opportunity to be part of this exciting and valuable initiative. I think, like everyone on this call, we at Redspeed firmly believe that preventable road death or injury is unacceptable. And this conviction is deeply ingrained in our, in our company culture, shaped by my 3 decades of experience within the road safety sector. For me, success of cameras is all about the data. And I have seen great improvements in this over the last decades, thankfully, because looking back to the 90s, the nascent stages of automated enforcement saw collision data used somewhat loosely. Regrettably, there were instances where camera deployments were driven by political expediency rather than rigorous data analysis. And this not only diluted the potential for casualty reduction at camera sites, but also negatively impacted public perception. For example, installing cameras at locations with no prior collision history inevitably meant that the KSI figures could only increase, contributing to a modest overall KSI reduction of around 13% in that decade. And then the advent of camera partnerships under hypothecation in the 2000s, I felt marked a turning point. The framework compelled a more robust and data-driven approach to site selection and camera deployment. And this shift yielded a substantial improvement in the effectiveness of speed cameras, achieving in that decade an impressive 25% reduction in KSIs. Fast forward to the last decade, we have witnessed an acceleration in technological advancements and our understanding of road safety and how these technologies can be used. And so data has evolved from simply identifying hazardous locations to informing the very strategies of enforcement. We now leverage sophisticated systems to shape targeted operations, proactively identify emerging safety issues, and much more, all powered by the intelligent application of the data. At Redspeed, we take immense pride in our latest range of advanced speed enforcement technologies. However, a recent insight from a data specialist we brought on board to develop a cutting-edge back-office software platform truly resonated with me. The platform itself was designed to empower police forces to harness the full potential of how we collect the data. But his candid remark, "Yeah, Tom, nobody cares about how good the cameras are. They are just data collection tools. It's all about how the data is used." This comment initially took me aback even. However, upon reflection, he was absolutely right. Whilst our cameras do represent the state-of-the-art collection tools, and I firmly believe ours are amongst the best available, it is the intelligent analysis and application of the information they gather that ultimately drives safer roads. I could go on about this subject for the full hour, but I'll stop there and just summarise again. It's all about the data.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tom. Richard?
Hi there. Thanks, Simon. Yes, I'm a professor of psychology at University of Sheffield. I do research about psychological processes underpinning risk-taking and antisocial behaviours, and I've always been very interested in applying this to road safety. As such, I'm interested in understanding and intervening with risky driving behaviours, and I'm sure we all accept here that speeding is a really good example of a risky driving behaviour to intervene with. And recently I've become interested in intelligent speed assistance as a technology that can help drivers to stay within the speed limit. So I want to be clear from the start, I've got no links to any manufacturers who make the technology, who make cars at all. My research on this topic has been funded by the Road Safety Trust, which goes by the University of Sheffield. So I don't know how familiar people are with intelligent speed assistance. It's often abbreviated to ISA. It's a technology that helps drivers stay within the speed limit. Sometimes systems are advisory, where they warn the motorist that they're driving over the speed limit and leave it to the motorist to do something about it themselves. Sometimes the system intervenes, where when the speed limit is exceeded, power is reduced to the engine and the vehicle slows down until it reaches the speed limit again. So we've been tending to focus on intervening systems because the evidence is much stronger that they can help people to reduce their speed and reduce the risk of having a crash. This technology has actually been around for about 25 years. My understanding of how things change in the world is that technologies often do take a long time to come from creation to being commonly used. So, for example, with safety belts, which I think has quite a lot of parallels with intelligent speed assistance, the research was certainly there in the 1930s, showing that safety belts could save lives. But it wasn't really until the 1980s in high-income countries that it became very common to use safety belts, and still not fully complied with, even in the UK, and certainly not complied with across the world. So I think part of the process of getting new technologies to be widely accepted is to have road safety campaigns and informational packages which can help people to understand the benefits of using technology. I think that was certainly true in the case of safety belts and how they became popular, and then how the legislation sort of followed on from the education. So a lot of our Road Safety Trust work has been about trying to design and evaluate informational materials that best explain the benefits of using ISA to motorists as that becomes available in their cars.
Brilliant. Thanks, Richard. I'm going to pick you up on quite a few of those points in the discussion as we go through the next hour. So thank you very much for that. And Daniel?
Morning all. Nice to meet everyone. I'm Dan Ward. I'm the telematics director at Acorn Insurance. I've been with this group now for about 12 years. Just a bit of my background. My journey had me walking up and down taxi ranks at the ripe old age of 18 in my first role, through to working with fleets and later helping to open some of the branches across the UK for the group. Eventually, I came back to Liverpool to focus on our telematics offering. At that point, we were struggling to get it to work properly. In short, I couldn't get it to work properly. And after some time, I should say, rather, trying to fix it, I decided to take a bit of a step back and take a slightly different role in the group and lead up our project department. So slight bit of time went between the two. I then came back to telematics when we acquired Carrot, which was a young driver-based telematics broker over in Crewe. I led the business from that point. That was 3-4 years ago. We now have got 3 key brands under that arm. We've got Carrot Insurance, as I mentioned. We've got My Policy based in Halesowen, near to Birmingham, and we've also got Acorn Protect. Between them all, I think we're caring for close to 50,000 young drivers in the UK. I think just to touch on some of the points, I think insurance in the past has been rightfully vilified in their use of telemetry. And back to Tom's point before, the data that goes with it. But one thing I'm exceptionally passionate about is making sure that we use these telematics brands to monitor and not just penalise customers, but genuinely educate and support them as well. especially young drivers, because we need to start building out safe habits. So our customer service agents and the teams, they're all bespoke trained to work closely with young drivers. I'm keen for us to collaborate more widely with a lot of the brilliant people that are on this call today, including those hosting the webinar. So again, thank you to the guys for inviting me on, because we do believe genuinely in building a culture of safe driving, and that has to start from the ingress point of customers as they hit the roads. On a personal note, so I'm a dad to two young boys, which really sharpens my focus on why this work matters. I'm also a proud trustee of the Bobby Colleran Trust, which is a local Liverpool charity dedicated to road safety. So today's topic is very close to my heart. So again, grateful to be included.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dan. And thank you, all three of you. Now, just to set a little bit of context, there are various pieces of research and figures from organisations such as ROSPA and PACTS, which show that a 5% reduction in average speed can lead to a significant decrease in road fatalities, as much as 20 to 30%. Other sources support similar findings, showing that even small reductions in speed have a disproportionately large impact on crash rates and severity. So I want to look at some of the technology that's being used currently to manage safe speeds. And Tom, if you talked about the technologies that Redspeed do, but to start with, could you just describe sort of some of the key technologies being used for enforcement at the moment, sort of, a broad overview of all the ones that are currently being used, if you could?
Yes, of course. I think everyone on this call knows that the technology contributes to achieving the stat that you mentioned earlier about the 5% speed reduction. And I'm not just talking about our systems, as other camera manufacturers are available. But cameras that can monitor speed these days across sort of multiple lanes and in both directions to help ensure consistent speed adherence will help lead to those reductions in speeds that we're talking about, and obviously decrease the fatalities. And we're finding the technology these days is all non-intrusive, so there are no loops to be cut on the road or road markings to put down on the road surface, etc. And the cameras are getting smaller and can be hung on lamp columns these days, rather than having a big civils works infrastructure to support them. But going back to the data, which you might find as a common thread throughout this call, it is essential that the back office software allows authorities to target the specific speeding hotspots, and be able to filter the data to identify repeat offenders and help inform enforcement strategies. And by having the support of the cameras on the road and the back office software does help contribute to getting the number of collisions down. Just anecdotally, we recently had a police force ask us whether certain cameras were working properly in their area as the offence numbers were dropping. And so we looked into it, and the cameras were operating properly. So I think it just meant that the cameras were doing their job and offending levels were coming down. And that really is the ultimate aim.
That's a really good point, which leads on to the next point I was going to ask you, was to talk about how many local areas in the UK are developing Vision Zero road safety strategies. Vision Zero being an ambition to have zero road deaths or serious injuries. And I was going to ask, what impact has basically any of this sort of speed technology that we're going to talk about, what impact that's had on helping those areas work towards the zero road deaths targets? It sounds like that's one example you're familiar with anyway.
Yeah, I'm quite an old-fashioned proponent in road safety. And I still believe fundamentally in the 3 E's of road safety. As we know, it's engineering, enforcement and education. And technology has really affected all of these 3 A's in a good way, I believe, because it has enabled sort of improved enforcement with different types of enforcement available. We are really data-driven with for the decision-making process. Safer infrastructure. Technology does help roll out safe infrastructure with and informs the design of roads and junctions, safer roads and junctions. Something that just is outside our gift, if you like, is advanced vehicle safety. It's not something we're involved in, but collision avoidance systems contribute to preventing accidents. And also technology can be used to improve the road safety messages, which there's many more ways of getting the correct messages out there, and these should be embraced. I mean, we have some of the tools for providing solutions to these aspects. But I do believe that this is where collaboration across service providers is essential for the whole solution, because I don't think one organisation can fit all the requirements to achieve the Vision Zero.
Brilliant. And Richard, you mentioned your particular focus around ISA. I know you told us a little bit about that in your introduction, but could you go into a little bit more detail about that? You mentioned advisory and intervening systems. How do they actually work?
Yeah, so ISA's it's a relatively new technology in terms of it appearing in people's cars. As I say, the technology has been around for about 25 years. So it works by the car knowing what the speed limit is. That could be through a map, that could be through a camera system that's looking at the speed signs. And then an advisory system would simply warn the motorist that they're going over the speed limit. Maybe it makes a sound, maybe it has a visual warning. So in my car, it shows you sort of a speed limit sign, and if you go above it, it starts flashing a little bit bigger. That's an advisory system. An intervening system involves the car actually slowing itself down if it realizes that it's going above the speed limit. So it will cut power to the vehicle gently. It doesn't apply the brakes. Or certainly not in a system I know, it just reduces the power. So you very gently slow down to the speed limit. And it can't always do that. If you're going downhill, then my car will warn me that I've had a speed limiter actually, but it won't be able to slow you down because you're going downhill. So it tells you, you're going to have to do something. Is that clear?
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And has your research highlighted how effective ISA has been at reducing speed-related collisions? I appreciate it's a new technology, but has it been around long enough for you to see the impact?
Yeah, I mean, it's not my research, but there has been research that's asked that question. Oliver Carsten at University of Leeds has been really instrumental in doing that sort of work. He's been involved in a range of field trials where fairly large groups of motorists have used ISA, and then they've looked at how that reduces their speed. Can be various forms of ISA. So I think even with intervening ISA, the evidence is the advisory ISA doesn't really have an awful big impact on how people drive. The intervening ISA does. You can have systems where I think all systems that are available at the moment allow the driver to override. So if the ISA starts slowing the car down, normally you can just press harder on the accelerator and the ISA stops working. So if you want to go above the speed limit because you're overtaking a tractor and the speed limit's changed, you can. So if you have a system where people can override it, I think the evidence is that still has a big impact on their speeding. And if you sort of map that to how speeding relates to crashes, that might lead to about an 11% decrease in speeding in crashes. If you have a system where the driver can't override it, that could lead to about a 30% decrease in serious crashes, I think is the findings from Oliver's work. It's not my work.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, and obviously, potentially a big impact there. Dan, a lot of your products focus around telematics systems for young drivers, new drivers, and having two kids who passed their driving test in the last few years and gone through their initial period with black boxes in their cars. I've seen the important contribution they've made. What are the latest sort of technological advancements in telematics? That's clearly a fast moving technology. How's that impacting road safety?
I think not to half disagree with you, but I actually think it's probably been the same largely for the last 20 odd years in terms of how the actual boxes work. But where you are right is that absolutely engagement with that data set and what we can do for customers to build into apps or build into solutions to show them that data and where the infringements may happen. I think probably everyone on this call or webinar can see where they're getting prices now, which include black boxes, probably even on older age groups, where it's really just a data collection mechanism for people and insurance companies to understand roads and how people actually act on them and build products around that data. One of the really key improvements I think I've seen specifically within the young driver space is the actual data quality that comes through that unit, allowing us to actually see where, let's say there are a certain segment of customers that need to improve their driving, therefore we need to intervene a little bit quicker. So again, risk management's nothing new within insurance. And sadly, a few people again on the webinar may have experienced their partners or sons or daughters being cancelled by a telematics provider. I think where we would prefer to take it in the future, and I go back to my original point before on safe driving, is that realistically the engagement profile needs to improve on what we do, using that data and the quality of that data that now comes from the boxes, whether it's 4G or 5G data capture, is imperative for us to then build out a more engaging and educational profile. So that's realistically, I think, where the technology's improved over the last couple of years.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you about the opportunities to improve engagement shortly, so keep that point in mind. Now, Richard was just mentioning ISA. Do ISA systems and telematics work together to reduce collisions? How are they able to work together?
I need to pick Richard's brain on it, if I'm brutally honest, because it's not something I've actually reviewed in terms of data sets before. Obviously, I'm aware of the technology in cars and how it's advanced over the last couple of years. Nobody throw any eggs at me. I own a Tesla, so it beeps at me every 5 seconds if I go over the speed limit, so that's absolutely fine. It's before all the issues in America. I'm not going to go into that politically, but yeah, so in terms of the actual advancement, whether it's a heads-up display or whether it's there's some low interaction devices that are now coming into the market where they may beep if you're going slightly over the speed limit, which I quite like. Because I prefer as few screens in the car as possible now, in terms of distraction for younger drivers. So again, the technology is advancing, but it's something that I'm curious to see how it can play a bigger part in the future.
Brilliant. So what I'd like to do now is look at a little bit about the psychology of speed management. And in the first webinar we ran about a month ago, we looked at some of the excellent communications programs being run around the country to encourage adoption of safe speeds. But clearly lots of drivers have a perception that they're being monitored, and to a certain extent they are. But Tom, how important is it to balance effective speed enforcement with public acceptance of what are often perceived as surveillance technologies?
Well, to be frank, it's extremely important. I believe public trust is crucial for the successful implementation of any technology in this respect. We have to take the public along with us on the journey. As you think of mass public disobedience, would have a severe impact on the court systems and also affect the overall enforcement process. So, how do we do it? For cameras, certainly, I think there are 3 ways. Firstly, we have to try and demonstrate transparency in how the systems operate, what data they collect and how it is used. Secondly, and I think this is absolutely key, is to demonstrate the technology's role in it's all about reducing accidents and saving lives, and this is their very purpose from the camera point of view. Lastly, respecting privacy concerns and implementing safeguards to prevent misuse of data is essential. And these 3 measures, I believe, can significantly improve the public acceptance. But excuse me, ironically, under hypothecation in the 2000s, I think we were under the biggest scrutiny of camera use because of the proliferation of cameras. And there was kind of numerous and initially relentless accusations of cameras being a tax on motorists, a cash cow, blah, blah, blah. Yet this was a period of the first time that collision data was used consistently across the country and had to be under the rules. And cameras installed then had the biggest impact on collisions. We were actually required as a camera partnership to have a communications team as part of the operation. And I really believe this did help contribute to addressing the inaccurate statements peddled by some of the elements of the public and the media. And I think during those times, we made good inroads into gaining public acceptability for cameras.
Yeah, I think from what you see with various local communities, acceptance of community speed watch, which often leads to some of the vehicle activated signs that come up. You've generally got lots of members of the public now who recognise the danger specifically to their own children, I think, don't they? That's often what drives that locally. Dan, you mentioned in the previous question about engagement with telematics and engaging drivers more. I know some of the systems use gamification and rewards. So what are the sort of preferred ways that these devices incentivize safe driving and encourage drivers to adhere to speed limits?
So I think stepping back a little bit, the one thing I kind of landed on a couple of years ago when I think you approach insurance documentation slightly fresher after looking at it from a young driver view, is it's completely naff for most first-time drivers in the UK to understand what exactly the product is. So what we've tried to do over the last certainly like 6 months to 12 months is rework that to make it a lot more pleasant for 17, 18, 19-year-olds to understand. And then also for mum and dad's support with that person's learning. It's not something we're taught in schools. We're not taught to safe drive. We're certainly not taught to read very complicated insurance documents and understand how that proposition is going to work. So by the point you actually gamify something, there's not really a base level understanding of why you're actually gamifying it to begin with. So I think stepping back, the key thing for us is to take them on that journey from an insurance perspective, realize we've got an obligation, not just as a broker, but as part of our group with the insurer Haven in the background, to make sure that we are educating people appropriately so that when we do gamify something, it has a purpose to it. I think the industry jumped to that very, very early on, try to reward, try to give prizes, for safe driving, but in reality, it might have been misguided. So I think certainly trying to reposition that is an obligation that most providers are trying to do now.
So you think that's a general point then, that we need to be much more thoughtful with the communication around why those driving behaviours are expected before we start trying to be clever with them.
100%. And I think that's my point about a Tesla. There's a certain perception of that Tesla now. However, going back to insurance, I think because of some of the actions of other providers in the past, or maybe the data not being great, or the actual box not being great that's in a car, there's rightfully a concern, that that's still the case now, whereas we're actually finding we need a bit of a reset, maybe take that product back to its basics, which we're able to do now with the quality of that data inside of it, and then rebuild the products to actually add value to people's lives, which I do think we can do.
Excellent. So, Richard, from a psychology perspective, how difficult is it to get that balance right between encouraging safe speeds against, drivers' desire for, independence and to sort of, to a certain extent, have a bit more freedom?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. And I think what we found with research we've done talking to drivers about using ISA, so we've been talking to drivers who use ISA, we've been talking to drivers who don't use ISA and imagining what it'll be like, thinking that it's the technology that's coming out and how we can promote it best. I think a lot of what comes out, they're not particularly focused on saving themselves from having a crash. They don't necessarily think themselves that speeding is going to get them to have a crash. If they did, perhaps they wouldn't do it. And what they tell us is what they like about ISA is that it might actually reduce their risks of getting a speeding fine. So they think that there's times when they're speeding that they don't know they're speeding, and that ISA can really reduce the risk of those times. So that's one of the things we think is important to emphasize to them, to promote using ISA. And also that it means that driving's more, there's one less thing to worry about while you're driving. So not to say that you don't need to pay attention, absolutely not. But it maybe means you don't have to worry so much about keeping your speed under the speed limit because you're worried about getting a fine. It means you can then focus more on what the pedestrian on the side of the road is doing, what the motorist in front is doing, which lane you're supposed to be in. So very much sort of emphasizing the benefit to the driver in the real time of them driving, rather than reducing the risk of them having a crash, is one of the things we think it's important to focus on.
And are there any challenges or misconceptions that need addressing relating to ISA? Have you got any suggestions or strategies for addressing any of those?
Yeah, I think it's something that motorists who've not used it before worry that their car's going to slow down dramatically. You know, they think it's going to involve the brakes suddenly coming on when they don't want them to come on, which, you know, I don't know of any system that's ever done that. It just slows the car down gently. They worry. There is a common worry that you need to be able to speed out of an accident or speed out of a dangerous situation. I suspect that situation is incredibly rare if it exists, but this, you know, we've interviewed policymakers, driving experts, everyone. There's about a 50-50 split about whether people think that's a real thing or whether they think that's just something that people worry about. I think it's a bit like the worry about the safety belts causing you to drown if you crashed into a river or something like that. It's an incredibly rare situation for them. And that's not particular, but you know, there could be very rare situations where you do need to speed out to break speed limits to be safer. And I think some drivers who genuinely worry about that. And I think the thing we want to emphasize there is that ISA systems are always going to have an override for the foreseeable future. I know maybe when cars become totally automated, if Elon gets his way on that, which I wouldn't mind that so much about some of the other things, not so much about some of the other things he's doing at the moment. But so there is an override. So if you are in a situation where you say speeding is the safest thing to do, you always can. We're certainly going to have that foreseeable future because the infrastructure doesn't support the ISA to get the speed limit right every time. So there has to be an override available to deal with a situation where the car thinks it's a 30, but actually it's a 40 or whatever.
Yeah. And picking up the adoption theme, Dan, if I can come back to you, obviously we discussed some young drivers using telematics, but telematics is very common technology in use within fleets and that kind of thing to improve driver behaviour. Are there any key challenges you see in getting drivers or sort of employers to adopt telematics technology?
Specifically in fleets, would you say, Sam?
No, I would say either both getting fleets to take it up, maybe because they don't see the benefits so much, but also encouraging drivers within fleets, so business drivers and public drivers more generally, to sort of accept telematics as a useful tool.
I think going back to my days when I was managing taxi fleets, which was a challenge at the best of times across the UK. A lot of the guys there were quite reticent to take the technology on. One, because it was very expensive at that point, and then two, the quality of the data that was coming out of the units, it was quite difficult for them to manage people on that basis. I think my only message now is the technology's come on a long way. To keep on repeating the point that Tom was making about data quality and how that's used, that's come on a long way. And I think actually the adoption within most fleets has been pretty good. Certainly some of the work that I've seen, or some of the fleets that are still keep in touch with, do use telematics, to manage their drivers. Whether the drivers like it or not is probably a completely separate conversation there. But I think by and large, the review of that driver's performance and whether or not they are adhering to speed limits and they are being safe on the roads, pretty hard for them now to not understand why that box is doing what it should be. I think as long as you get the adoption from the person running that fleet and they are understanding of that data and what the meaningfulness is for the drivers to perform well, yeah, it's absolutely great.
There's a couple of questions coming in, and I'll put this one to you, Tom, because it's about insurance. And Tony is asking, why is it that insurance companies don't recognise or promote the important advanced driving courses that are provided very cheaply by volunteers throughout the country? This could very easily work hand in hand with telematics.
I mean, quite easily from our side. So it's quite a boring response, but we're totally open to it. I think based on so I had a Pass Plus and I got no discount for it, which still stings back in the day before I'd actually started working in insurance. I think in terms of the actual adoption of it within rating mechanisms now, there's probably very little value to be put into that. However, we are a UK-based insurance group, so I'm not against reviewing as to why and what that work is. We have been starting some engagement with local driving schools to understand what are the next steps that young drivers can take to potentially discount that further. And I actually do believe young drivers that want to take on that next step, again, going back to traditional Pass Pluses or additional learning, probably exemplify better drivers. So again, more than open suggestions. It's not something I've ever really dipped my toe into the water of, but please do fire over any ideas.
Brilliant. And possibly one for you, Richard. It's all very well having more and more technology in a car, but drivers tend to drive to the limitations of their vehicles without realising that the level of their own driving is poor. Is that a challenge for us, getting people to realise that their driving skills perhaps and awareness isn't what it could be?
Yes, definitely. There's a long literature on that, about sort of drivers overestimating their abilities. There's certainly a perception that we see in our research that of drivers feeling that it is okay to go a few miles over the speed limit, and that they're a better judge of the speed limit than the speed limit is. What's genuinely safe. But there's a lot of people out there as well who think that they're speeding by accident, and intelligent speed assistance can help with that. And I think also that the more it becomes used, the more it will it might become normative to use it as well, so that it might sort of trickle down into some of the more deliberate speeding as well.
Quite an interesting question here. I'm not quite sure who to throw this one to first, but I'll read it out, and then it would be. This is from Stuart, and it would be interesting if any of the speakers have considered the impact of worn or damaged tyres. Stuart's the chairman of Tyre Safe. Research has shown that speeding, a vehicle travelling at 60 on worn tyres has the same stopping distance as a vehicle travelling at 68, and at 70, worn tyres add 27 metres to the total wet weather stopping distance. We need to think beyond this traditional approach to speed and speed limits. Have any of you got any thoughts on that comment?
So one of the things we're trying to do at the moment is launch a series of comms that basically allow the customers, or young drivers specifically, to really take note of what they need to do to look after their car. I mean, I go back to the points I kind of made earlier over communication and engagement, and our obligation, I think, to try and support. I think there's a perception that young drivers don't open emails. We see an open rate of close to 70 to 80%, which is obscene for most emails that we send out on a daily basis. So one of those emails is about tyres. In terms of offering more assistance, or certainly pointing customers into the right direction of where they should go and do their tyre maintenance, I think it's absolutely important. So yeah, great question.
Excellent. Tom, question for you. There's plenty of road safety campaigns promoting lower or safer speeds, and we've all been talking about the technologies, various technologies, where probably a lot of drivers aren't maybe aware of how they work, and Richard's obviously given us an indication of how ISA works, for instance. But do you think there's a need for more understanding about the various enforcement and assistance systems themselves, what their capabilities are, how they work?
What am I off mute? Yes, and absolutely. I mean, there are emerging technologies that are in the marketplace at the moment, 4D radars and AIs, etc. And I do see on my social media pages numerous inaccuracies on people's, because I was trying to second guess how cameras work, and we're totally open to it. Yeah, but we try to inform people and let them know how the cameras work and what they can do. What they can't do, going back to Stuart's point about tyres, and I was going to pitch in on that one. Interestingly, we were asked whether or not we can use emerging AI technology to look at tyres and see if we can detect a worn tyre on the road from an automated camera. I personally think it's a few years away to get the resolution and snap the revolving tyre at speed to be able to understand how deep the tread is on it. But it has been considered, and it was looked at some time ago, and maybe that's one for the future. But for emerging technologies, going back to the AI, we use it to it can be used for analysing traffic patterns, predicting potential hazards, and automating enforcement processes, thereby sort of reducing the processing time for camera operators. And we try and combine our 4D radar products with AI to enhance the accuracy and scope of detection. So we can allow for tracking vehicles and pedestrians in all weather conditions, and use our integrated systems to allow for a far broader scope of violation detection. So in the marketplace these days, and it's not just with us; it's across other manufacturers. Distracted driving, seatbelt violations, and providing real-time alerts and interventions. And our cameras, we're heavily implementing the two together. And one of our aims is, going back to the processing time, is to reduce the time it takes for police operators to process an offence. In these days of reduced resources and budget restrictions, if we can increase the productivity of operating staff, this is of a significant benefit to the police forces.
Excellent. Richard, just coming back to ISA again, when we were talking about how that worked, and asked Dan whether ISA and telematics can work together, how does ISA, if at all, work with some of the other driver assistance systems that are fitted to cars? I'm thinking particularly things like adaptive cruise control.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's got some similarities to adaptive cruise control. So adaptive cruise control, you set your speed limit, and I think I've not actually driven with one myself, but it'll keep you a certain distance away from the car in front as well. But in adaptive cruise control, you could presumably set a speed limit that's above the actual speed limit. So it fits in with lane assist and things like that, but they're separate systems. You could have the ISA without them. You could have the other things without ISA.
Yeah, because adaptive cruise is actually one of my favourite technologies, road safety technologies. I find it quite relaxing to use. I find it significantly reduces my level of fatigue on longer journeys. And I know, for instance, if you set it to maximum of speed of 70 on the motorway, it'll follow the car in front, reducing and increasing speed as necessary. But if you then come up on, say, some roadworks and there's a temporary average speed section of 50 miles an hour, you've then got to manually reset it to 50 so as the maximum speed. So presumably linking it with ISA, it's potentially it can do all of that automatically.
Yeah, I mean, Daniel maybe can tell you about what his Tesla does. I don't know. I get it. Does it handle things like that?
It can do, and it's got a very nice rainbow road feature that shows you exactly where you're driving and how the automated works, but it's not foolproof. I'm trying to sell the Tesla, by the way, just in case anybody thinks that I'm pro Musk. Definitely not, so it's fine.
So Richard, just picking up on ISA again. Someone mentioned about, particularly with younger drivers, their tendency to drive older cars, which isn't going to have ISA fitted to it. So, is it possible to retrofit ISA?
Yes, I think it's a really good point. Yeah, I was thinking exactly the same thing. And my research interest is actually young drivers. But yeah, ISA, the research we're doing is not particularly targeted to young drivers at all. And I think that's absolutely right, that the insurance means that, and just buying a car or whatever, it just means young drivers are going to have older vehicles. So yes, my understanding is it is absolutely possible to retrofit it. It costs hundreds, I think, to do it, which in the context of the other costs of motoring maybe isn't so much, but it is a big cost. And I think linking it to as I'm sure many people know, in the UK, we've had a lot of discussion about graduated licensing for young drivers, where there'll be successive restrictions on driving for people in the very early stages of driving, because we know that the very early stages of driving is the really riskiest period, the first few months. The first 6 months, I think, was the proposal to try and target. And I think that, personally, I think there's a real opportunity for requiring ISA to be used during those first 6 months, because that wouldn't reduce the opportunities for people to drive for work and things like that. It would just help them to drive within the speed limit during that very risky time. So I think that would be a really exciting opportunity. But yeah, there is a cost involved to retrofit.
Excellent. Dan, I don't know if you saw it in the chat. Paul's put in a question just asking whether you might expand on your reluctance to employ gamification and rewards.
Great question. So I'm a bit of a nerd at heart anyway, so I play quite a lot of computer games, or did do before I had 2 young children. So don't judge me too much on that on the Tesla comments. But In terms of gamification, it's how it actually works within the construct of what you design. So if you've got an application, say a mobile app, and you are saying to customers, well, we can aggregate your performance against 10 other people in the area and we'll put you first, second, or third. So you can be in the Champions League spot, so you might be in the relegation zone, depending on your performance, those kind of things. I think coming up with something that's actually beneficial to the individual that allows them to engage with it, it's a lot more difficult than that. And again, I don't profess to understand how a 17-year-old thinks, but what we'd want to do is make sure we do put something within those solutions in the future that gives the customer the best possible chance of improving their driving, not just something that's superficial. So that's my only reluctance, and not to say that there isn't things out there that can be done or there's ways to kind of crack that, or in fact rewards to give to the individual, that can improve and probably prompt better driving. The way that we're trying to introduce a few new things, quite low level. So we're calling them nudges, which is very basic, but again, the concept of a streak, which is you get maybe a couple of weeks where you've had great driving. And we just make sure we promote that with some positive affirmations of saying, great, well done, 7 weeks into that streak, brilliant, however that might look. And then similar to that as well, some nudges that start to identify potential bad habits. Like, again, that person's not quite breaching the speed limit, but they're flirting with it and they may be doing some speeds in built up areas or near schools that we think are causing concern. So therefore, we'd like to nudge you and just say, we're not warning, you're not going to get cancelled, but please just slow down, be mindful of the areas that you're driving in. So there's definitely ways to do it. It's not discarding at all. It's just making sure we don't launch something that isn't the right feature for the young driver segment we work with.
Brilliant. I wanted to talk a little bit about infrastructure and the sort of increasing talk about, for instance, smart cities and where the technology and the infrastructure talks to each other more. Tom, how do you ensure speed camera systems or other enforcement camera systems remain adaptable, possibly to changes in regulation and vehicle capabilities? Or, how does the development of cameras change for use in smart cities where we're looking at connecting vehicles and infrastructure together?
A very good question. I firstly need to say that cameras for speeding anyway, and speeding in a red light are restricted by the Home Office type approval process, and rightly so, to be honest. I mean, the public has to have confidence that the cameras have gone through a due process of scrutiny before they get implemented onto the road. But we try and design our cameras and our software to be as flexible and adaptable as possible for local needs and regulations. Our Sentio cameras are also designed for versatile deployment using sort of battery power or trailer mounted, etc., etc. For the change in regulations point, recently the move towards 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. Our cameras have always been tested at this lower limit, so through the HOTA process, so they can be used immediately and don't require retesting. And we manage the design of our cameras through detailed software design systems in a modular way, and we have flexible configuration, etc., etc. But we cannot second guess everything, and we do talk to central government and customers, and we have good communication links with them, try to identify emerging trends in the requirements and sort of adapt swiftly to them. When it comes to the smart cities element, there are possibilities to link up with other systems, etc. And we do try to develop camera systems that sit outside the Home Office type approval process, so that we're not restricted by them, or they cannot have any speed enforcement or red light enforcement activity within them. But so there are restrictions. It is difficult, but it's like again, it's all through good communication and seeing what the emerging trends are with the customers and local authorities.
Excellent. And Richard, we're just sticking on the kind of infrastructure theme. Are there any improvements that we need to make to infrastructure to make ISA technology more widely adopted in future?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. So I know there's been a couple of comments in the chat about that, and that's an effective speed map would be really important. I think that was the European Union has legislated that some form of ISA needs to be fitted in all new cars. Originally, they were planning to specify it was going to have to be an intervening ISA. But I think part of the reason they accepted advisory ISAs is that they were worried that the speed map wasn't up to it for determining speed limits through GPS systems. And it's, we absolutely need systems that work. We need cameras that can detect the speed limits properly. And actually, I think that might be as much about having signage which is effective so that cameras don't see speed limit signs on side roads and things like that. And that's why ISA systems would have the override available, so that if the car can't get the speed limit right, then it can be overridden.
I think it needs to be a mix of mapping and cameras, because camera systems on their own don't work because there aren't enough signs around. I've regularly travelled on sections of the M4 where the car's telling me the speed limit's 30 or 40 because I came out of an industrial park or something and there wasn't another gateway sign before I got to being on the motorway. So it's lots of pitfalls with that, aren't there?
Yeah, so the infrastructure's got to be strong.
Yeah. All right. Let's we've got just under 10 minutes left. Let's have a look at sort of future technologies then. So, Dan, looking ahead, what emerging technologies do you see that you believe will shape the next generation of telematics and speed management solutions?
So I think back to the points, I'm going to sound like a broken record again about data, but just in terms of the quality of data and also the accuracy in the way it's transmitted from units, that's going to improve significantly. I think most of the telematics providers that we work with are just about starting to make the shift from 3G to 4G, whereas I think most people that are on this webinar, again, have probably got phones that are capable of up to 5G. So again, the speed of that data, the amount of data you can send over that line is going to be infinitely important to how we shape what we do in the future. I think app-only solutions, I think a good chat with Tom before when we were airing our dirty laundry, before everyone joined the webinar. Again, those solutions aren't ideal quite yet. I think it's still being worked on quite heavily by the industry and people want to provide app-only solutions where it uses the gyro that's built into the phone as a telematics solution. From my side, it's not the safest device that we can put into a car with a young driver, and I think that will develop significantly over the next 5 to 10 years. Factory fitted onboard telemetry as well. Quite a lot of new cars are starting to have telematics inbuilt into the car that allows it to transmit telematics to the provider and understand how that car is being driven, how it performs. Access to that data is going to be infinitely important in the future, and I think that's something that will come on. Again, we've touched on AI. I think it's been a demonized word for a lot of different reasons, but I like the idea of augmenting AI in the different roles that we're all working on, especially in road safety. So again, looking at how we work with insurance, our risk models, the way that we'll look whether a driver is turning left, the next day coming out of their road instead of right. What's the propensity of risk based on that and that person's understanding of the roads? What about terrain? What about all the different elements that we can do to contextualize that drive and improve on it? All of it sounds rather big brother, but I think it's super important to understand the safety of the individual and making sure we can improve the communications that go out to that person. I think that's pretty much it, to be honest. I think it's probably going to be a wave, but I'm reticent to commit to technology because something will come out tomorrow and it'll be something I've not touched on. So
yeah, it'll disrupt what's there and something that no one had foreseen. Richard, with ISA technology, how do you see that developing?
Well, I think it's going to become more commonly available. Newer cars are going to have it, whether there's legislation or not. I think manufacturers are already offering it more as a standard feature in some models, as an option in other models, and whether the UK follows Europe or whatever Europe does, it doesn't really matter. It's going to become more available. We're seeing it in fleets as well. So I think it's going to become more available. And for me, once it becomes available, the most important thing is for people to be able to use it and to be encouraged to use it. So that's sort of what we're sort of targeting, I guess.
Fantastic. And Tom, where's enforcement technology going? And I guess what part does AI have to play in that as well?
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. I think the AI is the way forward. We're developing cameras that can monitor speed accurately using AI rather than radar or loops or any other method. But it's a capture of the vehicle and what you can do with that data, and use the computer vision technology within to be adaptable enough. I don't know, for argument's sake, motorcycles in bus lanes. Yeah, we can train the AI machine to identify motorcycles using a bus lane, and also identify vehicles that aren't allowed to. So they'll be captured for illegal use, if you like, and the motorcycle will be allowed to use it. But then you've got to be aware of the unintended consequences of doing so, because how does that affect other road users, including cyclists? And does the impact of motorcycles using the bus lane impact on their safety? And by using AI, we can actually determine the number of near misses, whether or not that goes up or not, or whether it remains the same, and make sure that they're safe as well. And again, it comes back to the data. Now, I'm going back a couple of decades. I did a study on motorcycles in bus lanes many years ago, and it was quite an arduous task to have a look at these unintended consequences, which is now all available by using AI in a positive way. And had I had it back in 2006, it would have made life a whole lot easier, I have to say. But we can do things a lot easier and quicker and easy now.
Brilliant. I've got one final question for all three of you, which Tom, I'll give you first. When will we have a world where it's impossible for anyone to speed? And will this need older vehicles to be phased out completely?
Well, that is the first complication, isn't it? I've always been the firm believer that my type of cameras have a finite lifetime left, because of the advent of black box telemetry, etc., and ISA. I think that is the way forward. It's in Western Europe and other places we are quite advanced with that technology, but there are places in the world that don't. So when it comes back to the to the worldwide situation, that we're a long way off.
Richard?
I mean, I think the ISA works particularly well in the context of the speed cameras. Actually, I think people are, as I said, more worried about getting a speeding fine than they are about having a crash. So people will use the ISA to try and avoid the fine, and it will have the, for them, unintended consequence of reducing their risk of having a crash as well, which is a much worse outcome for them. So I think the evidence on enforcement being effective in reducing speeding and reducing crashes is really good. So, I don't see the cameras. I think the cameras are still very important at the moment. If we do get to the state of fully automated driving in this country, then I think that if it's done in the right way, could be a real advantage for safety. But as Tom was saying, there's huge. The world's a much bigger place, and there's a lot of work to be done in other countries where speeding is a really, really big problem. I've done work in Ghana. Speeding is a very good predictor of crash involvement there, even though the infrastructure is very, very different, and the driving situation is very, very different. So it'll still be very important for the world for a long time.
Brilliant. And Dan, do you think we'll see a time in the UK where it's impossible for anyone to speed?
What a question. I think there's a wonderful kind of chat going on in the Teams group over all the different steps required to kind of get software to work or get cameras to work better. I think there's like a combination of everything. We need better roads and cartography information, to be able to map out what the UK looks like. We have to use a blend of 2 or 3 different providers, whether it's Google here, TomTom. Everyone's got a different piece of the puzzle when it comes to how all our roads kind of interlink and work together in the UK. And then to that point, cameras need to improve the quality of them. Again, compared to your own human eye, my eyesight's awful. And I think even then my eyesight's better than my mobile phone camera can take a photo of it. And then to that point as well, in terms of the tech that's within a car, that has to improve exponentially as well, for us to get to the point of feeling confident that, we're hitting speed limits accurately, or, cars not going to identify an incorrect road marking and veer off to the left when it should have gone right. still think there's steps to go. I don't think it'll be within a decade. But I think there's also political things at play that might stop that. And I'll be out of a job in insurance, which might not be a terrible thing, I think, either. So we'll see. Might take a while.
Brilliant. Okay, well, we're up to the hour, so need to wrap that up now. Thank you very much for your questions and for everyone who's spared an hour to come and listen to this discussion. I hope you found that enjoyable to listen to. Tom, Richard, and Dan, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us. We have another webinar coming up. Let me just check that. So that one, this is the next one coming up, which is about safety of school transport, and it's in a couple of weeks' time, Wednesday the 22nd of May at 1:00. If you scan the QR code, that will take you to the registration page. The recording of the webinar that we've just done, the discussion that we've just had, will be edited over the next day or two, and that should be available in the Project Edward website in the showcase section by the end of this week. So thank you once again, everyone. Hope you found it interesting and enjoyable, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you very much.